And I would like to give you the feedback from the panel, and I'm sorry, well, then to interrupt, first of all, your discussions, but maybe that's giving you a bit of input also for your discussions. So our question to the audience was, what is the value that personalized medicine brings to healthcare systems? And the answer that was selected the most was cost-effective healthcare. And I think this is really where this session is giving great input to understand what means also, what is the different value also for cost-effective healthcare. So, well, it is around diagnosis, having the right diagnosis, the right treatment for the patient, and probably even having a treatment that is more expensive, but because it is the best treatment for the patient at the time. And I also learned from Anna that it's important to have, when we start the research already, the thinking about what are the regulatory frameworks, and also to start a good communication from the beginning to give the correct, or to understand also what is maybe the value for the regulatories. And I think what we really learned too is also, I'm looking forward for the panel, what value all the basics for personalized medicine can bring to healthcare systems in terms of infrastructures, in terms of data. So I'm looking forward for the discussions that might be quite diverse in this topic. And I hand over to you, David. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Monica. Good input for our panel. Happy to see that. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Serena Scollen, who is the head of Human Genomics and Translational Data at ELIXIR, the European infrastructure for bioinformatics and life science data based in Hixton, UK. Serena, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me fine? Can you hear me okay? Yes, great. Yes, so my remit is slightly different, is to bring a completely different angle to this discussion to the previous speakers. And I'm going to focus predominantly on how genomic and clinical data can be organised and how that can then be exploited in personalised medicine. So let's start with sort of some backgrounds. There's absolutely no doubt we're now in an era of genomic medicine. Generating data is no longer a rate limiting step, and we have many countries now embarking on national initiatives to generate genomic data. And the fact that that data is now being generated by healthcare rather than research means it's going to be exceptionally rich data. So there's a huge promise that it could be associated with health data and the possibility to link to other phenotypic data, and even on a longitudinal basis. So this is really exciting era that we're in at the moment. And many countries at the moment in Europe are proposing to use the Recovery and Resilience Facility to fund some additional sequencing at a national level. And that will come together as an initiative called the Genome of Europe in the next few months. So really, to then take that forward and maximise the opportunities for personalised medicine, we need to think about how we can work together. So one country can't really achieve everything they want to achieve alone. So we need to think about how we can increase the value by accessing that data, accessing broader data sets. And by this, we really need to access data across country borders. So how do we do this? We need to have investment in infrastructure. So the infrastructure needs to be created, and the ideal system is to have that as a federated system. So the data stays locally, and then you can access that data through cloud systems across borders. So this then needs to think through how we can put governance in place at the level of the exchange interfaces to make this work effectively. And the infrastructure itself needs to be trusted, it needs to be interoperable, it needs to be demonstrated, and all of these things feed into how we can set up an infrastructure that will enable citizens to trust that they can share their data, so that they can be interoperable, so that the local setup can be potentially different, but interoperable to the wider system, and then demonstrated so that that feeds back into the overall trust. And of course, there needs to be a framework around this, so a framework of how this can work, and that's driven in part by many initiatives, and ICPerMed obviously feeds into that. And I'm going to focus on how we're pulling together this framework as part of the 1+ Million Genomes initiative. So as part of that roadmap, the 1+ Million Genomes roadmap, we are coordinating project called the Beyond 1 Million Genome Project that ELIXIR coordinates. We bring together 29 partners to define the requirements from all stakeholders for cross-border access to genomics and personalised data. Once we have these requirements, we're translating them into technical specifications. So this is for the data quality, the standards, the technical infrastructure, and of course the ethical, legal and social issues, which are often harder to overcome than the more technical infrastructure. And then we're driving the adoption of that infrastructure to support the long term in the operation of how organisations at all sorts of levels, so the local, the regional, the national and European level. And we're doing this by providing guidance on development and also, critically in this discussion, ways of evaluating the economic impact. And just to note, ELIXIR, obviously from where I represent ELIXIR, and we're more generally putting together cross-border technical solutions to increase discoverability of data and also speed up access to data, to relevant data that has consent, which has already been obtained. So I was also asked to comment on the economic benefits. And if we think about the economic benefits of integrating genomics into healthcare specifically, it's really largely as yet unknown, but we can make educated guesses that suggest that healthcare will be made more efficient by cost savings linked to faster and more accurate diagnosis and more efficient treatments with reduced harmful side effects and biopharmacogenomics, etc., and personalised prevention based on risk scores. So a lot more work needs to be done on this, and that's part of the project that we're also working on. And just to reflect, the EU data strategy published by the Commission states that data is the lifeblood of economic development, that the EU has potential to be successful in the data agile economy. So this is really encouraging. We have the technology, we have the know-how, we have the skilled workforce. And of course, genomics in particular is an area we can really take advantage of this due to our health system infrastructure and our willingness to work together. So just to conclude, personalised medicine is clearly the future here. It's complex and it's uncertain how it might look, but we need to be working forward and overcoming some of the hurdles. We've seen recently how many of the hurdles around infrastructure and data sharing have been overcome, and it's pertinent to point to the fact that, with the recent pandemic, the infectious disease public health crisis has really helped us to overcome some of those hurdles, and we really need to get on the back of that and ensure that we move forward to redefine healthcare in this genomic space. And I'll hand back to you, David.
Thank you, Serena. To open the panel, I would like to go back to the poll outcome because it struck me, cost-effective healthcare systems. Cost-effective healthcare is the most important issue. I would like to give two examples here, not in personalized medicines, but two examples that are close to me, and they were sort of an eye-opener to me. When we introduced antiretroviral treatment in HIV, I was jumping on the last train because I was close to death. And I got these very expensive treatments. Thanks to them, I'm here today still. And I remember the discussion we had in the mid-90s, will we be able to afford these expensive treatments? This is going to be a nightmare. And that discussion lasted for about 3, 4 or 6 months, not longer, because we had fantastic cohorts in place and we could show how people did better very quickly once they got on these drugs. 20 years later arrive hepatitis C drugs curing a viral liver disease within a few weeks of treatment. And we had in Switzerland 4 years of discussions whether this intervention was cost effective or not. There were no cohorts in place, no data to be shown, very little evidence around. And I thought, heck, haven't we learned more in 20 years how to do our job properly? And in personalized medicine, we are talking since years about these wonderful targeted treatments, but I see no healthcare system really implementing personalized healthcare properly. And I see all of us talking and talking about value and can we pay for it? Can we sustain this innovation? And that's the question I would like to give to you as a panel to answer to first, because it came up also as the most important aspect in the poll. Anne, can I ask you first?
Yeah, so a very good, very important question. Well, obviously, I'm not a specialist on economics here or cost question, but what I can say, for example, is that, for example, in Germany, we just last year implemented a new law, which is the Digital Health Act, and with this new legislation, we now are able to, that doctors are now able to prescribe medical apps to patients. And this is maybe when we look more on the e-health and in the e-health system, this maybe is one first approach where yeah, an individual patient gets this kind of app for his needs, and what, for example, is one thing which you can do with this app is that you give your patient recorded outcomes, and with this it makes, we will go one step into the direction to yeah, improve all these the care system, and go into this direction of yeah, include PROs into this healthcare system.
Thank you, Anne. Axel, can I ask you to comment? You are on mute. You are on mute, Axel.
Yes, sorry. Can you understand me now? Sorry for holding up. That was a very interesting question. And I experienced a discussion about the hepatitis C drugs, and I think that's actually how we got to know each other in these discussions. And the interesting point is that we're talking, we're discussing, but we have no framework to have a structured discussion on what's the value and who's profiting and what something can cost. So I probably, as an economist, I got to defend both sides. If we pay too much, we cannot allocate that money to something else. So to put it precisely, if we spend too much on COVID vaccines, we might have problems within the next 10 or 20 years paying back the debt. Well, unless we print it, but that should have other issues. On the same side, you know, in hepatitis C, once the trucks were out, the discussion didn't even last 2 years. It was gone. Nobody was questioning an injection of about like 500 or 800 euro. And what they called this cost wave didn't actually come. And I'm going to jump over the oncology discussions, but my colleague here, she mentioned the Digital App Act. We even introduced a law in Germany, and we introduced the will to pay for apps via prescriptions. And for the last 1.5 years, I was looking for a description on how we can come up with a certain benefit, value, or utility score. And I think apps are perfect to demonstrate the problem. Usually I buy my apps on my phone, and I have to admit, I'm not paying much money. If it's about €4, I'm not going to pay for it. But that's my individual preference. But here, somebody else is making the decision which apps are being bought and for which price and who's going to pay for it. So I give you one example, which is on this side. Once the law was introduced, one of these apps was actually bumped up from €4 to €5, I think up to 40. That's one side of the coin. And the other is some of the more innovative apps are really struggling to demonstrate how valuable they are to patients. And once again, within the law and within the guidelines, it says they have to prove clinical benefits. Well, so how come we have different endpoints? We have more dimensions of benefits. How come we would like to actually to put in to this equation administration and how these apps help on different ways than clinical endpoints which can be measured? How are we going to put on this value? How are these apps being built? And I want to close my statement. I hope it is clear that if we, and I'm going to use this word on purpose, if we screw up in demonstrating value, if it's either apps, personalized medicine, hepatitis C, or HIV drugs, we have impact on what's being produced. We have impact on what's being researched. We have impact on what's actually utilized by patients within the next 10 years. So by looking at prices and the cost effectiveness range, we're pretty much developing the healthcare world for the next 10 to 15 years.
That's an interesting comment. Thank you, Axel. On the app issue, we currently see quite interesting examples throughout Europe. We have COVID apps all over the place, and they really don't work in Europe. In my country, it's because the supporting system that should function around it isn't here. So people stop using it because they see no benefit. And I think if apps are to play a role in the future of healthcare, I have to understand the benefit. Society has to understand the benefit of using them. Axel, again?
I have a very minor point, then I'm just going to shut up. That's a very good point. See, data security is always being put forward in order to cancel these initiatives. And with the COVID-19 apps, it was data security, which was being put forward to pretty much cancel innovations. And that's actually what holds us down. I'm not against data security. I'm actually very cautious about my own. I'll give you an example. Last year, I think it was a meeting we had together. I was presenting at a patients meeting, and I had one slide where data security and data safety was emphasized as mainly relevant for patients. And the patient stood up, and he clearly articulated his preferences. He said, "I'm going to live for another 2 to 3 years. I'm going to face a very tough last year. Do you really think data security is one of my problems? You can have all of my clinical data if you do research on it." And I think that was a clear articulation of preferences. All I wanted to say, maybe preferences shift once you're affected as a patient, and maybe we should have opened up the COVID-19 apps, because if people could have went to a restaurant, if people could have done sports and meet family, they probably would have sacrificed some of their personal rights and would have gave up a little bit of their security. Maybe they would have. We do not have any information. That's something patient preference information clearly could elicit from patients and communicate to decision makers. Thank you very much. That was a very good point.
Thank you, Axel. Serena, can I invite you?
Yeah, so Axel's raised a number of points I can comment on there about data security and so forth as well, but also to think about patients, but also the broader citizens. So it's not necessarily the patients we need to convince to access data. It's the broader citizens, because we'll all become those patients at the end that have 2 to 3 years to be more willing to share our data. So how do we educate those patients? But on your initial question, I think infrastructure comes back into play here. So one thing we're doing within the Beyond 1 Million Genome project and the 1+ Million Genome Initiative is to generate a maturity level model. So this is now in draft, which will essentially break down some of the domains and show a country how to move from a lower level to a higher level of maturity in this area. So one of the topics we have in that, one of the domains is investment and economic model, and that obviously breaks down into various sections, one of them being access and reimbursement. So we could think about how healthcare systems are able to get to novel treatments in a timely way and to progress through that. But I think we need that infrastructure in place and to start mapping procedures that not just for an initial country, but also for across Europe as well.
Thank you very much, Serena. Can I ask if there are questions from the audience to the panel? Is there something? We don't hear you.
David, currently there are no questions from the audience, so you can continue your discussions.
Okay, thank you very much. What was also mentioned was the value of personalized medicine on infrastructure and on the value of data. And somehow this confuses me a little bit because I'm a patient. Why should I care about the value of personalized medicine on infrastructure? It puzzles me. Could you comment on that? May I start with Anne, please?
Well, I think when I'm thinking about our STARS project, for example, and it sees like as an infrastructure where we want to build up a support framework for academics, and I think here, and we have been in contact before when we come about to give your recommendations to our common strategy, which we want to develop. So I think, of course, as a patient, you are very much in the center of a lot of questions. So so therefore, when thinking about our infrastructure, the STARS project, we want to have not only the views of our regulators, which are in the consortium, but of course also different stakeholders' perspective to get the best out of it in our common strategy in the end.
Thank you. What I'm actually most interested in as a patient is that authorities don't waste money on useless interventions, and perhaps personalized medicine could help us there a little bit. May I ask Serena to the floor to comment?
Yes, I'm not entirely sure I understand your question in full, but I mean, maybe I want to throw it back to you and say, why would you not see that there's value in your data for, there's so many questions we can pose. If we can reuse data for things that we don't yet know what those questions are, then there's added value that will come in the future.
I'm in a cohort study since 25 years. I know the value of my data because I have seen what the data collected in this cohort study has brought to my treatment and to my quality of life. It's absolutely mind-blowing. And actually, I don't understand that most European countries don't have a better system to capture how their patients are doing, especially the ones with chronic diseases. I think we set a certain standard in HIV that other chronic conditions didn't pick up yet. So it strikes me that Denmark, of course, Scandinavian countries, now Estonia too, they have good systems in place, but many other bigger countries are really struggling to see how patients do when they get a certain intervention, and it's a sad story that we spend so much time. Axel, may I invite you? I see you smiling.
Yes, because I like that question very much. My first statement is it's more methodological. There's no way of capturing value unless you ask the patient. There's no way of demonstrating benefit unless you have information about patient preference information. Everything else would be an arbitrary guess leading to arbitrary prices. Sorry for connecting this all the time, but that's the only perspective I really can talk to. Second, and I'm saying this before I say the third point, there are a lot of people, a lot of experts, a lot of patients, and a lot of employees working hard to make good decisions. And I actually would like to defend these people because I think they're doing good work. But on my third point, we have to acknowledge that setting prices, making decisions about utilization, reimbursement, and approval are pretty much a power struggle within an industrialized country. And it is, even if you're not industrialized. But there's a lot of money on the table. And according to that money, people are biased and opportunistic. And they're biased and opportunistic on both sides. So the question is, are the decision makers which are in charge actually willing to incorporate patient reference information? Are they willing to discuss their decisions with patients? Are they willing to be transparent about their value judgments? Or are they not? So to push this a little further, from what I experienced and from what I saw, I'm afraid to say I'm not sure they are. I'm not sure they would like to give up the power to make these multi-million-dollar decisions. And I'm not saying they're biased, according that they would earn money something. It is a career to be within that field. It is a political career to be the guy who is on top of these decisions. So, for example, in Germany, on the rare occasions where it's really tough between payers and providers, it's one person. It is one person who's going to make the decision, because it's going to be the chair who doubles up his votes if they do not agree, and it's going to be his personal value judgment about the benefits and risks of a certain drug. And we do have these examples where it was one person, one subjective decision, pretty much making decisions, even about the withdrawal of compounds to the German market. So I think it's a power struggle. I think we got to deal with it on the same perspective. I think we have to educate patients and patient advocates to sit on these tables. And I think we got to move this forward to have educated patients and patient advocates on these tables, which use scientific data to back up their arguments. And if they're ready to do this, they should be part of the decisions.
Thank you, Axel. And another interesting example would be antibiotics. What happens when prices are too low? We have a problem, and an increasing problem, and we will have to think how to get out of this position. I see no question from the audience coming up. I would like to invite there's an echo again here.
No, it was me. I just went online again. I just wanted to let you know there are no questions.
Thank you, Monica. Serena, I would like you to expand a little bit on the issue of data privacy in genomics and our struggle, given GDPR, to get out of this mess and this discussion, and how this is, what are the barriers we have to overcome. And I think COVID is also teaching us a couple of lessons here.
Yeah, so interesting topic we could spend a long time talking about. So a couple of things. So GDPR and along those lines isn't really meant to be a prevention, a wall up against being able to use data. It's meant to be there as a process. And I think there's a lot of bad press about GDPR as it comes out, and really it should be an enabler to access data and not be a hindrance. So that's one topic. I think I'd also like to go back to data security as well, because there's a fear, and Axel brought this up as a topic earlier, there's a fear around data security, and I think that's a huge issue in many respects when people are talking about data protection and their own data. And I think all there needs to be is a level of infrastructure in place that gives people there needs to be standards in place, and there needs to be trust. So once you have those standards in place, and once you have the trust in place, and I think again, not just with the patients, but back at the citizen level, then people will be more willing to share their data or have other people access their data for multiple uses, because they know that there's infrastructure in place. So it could be very much that data isn't released, a very high level of metadata is released at a general level to the public, but actually only very bona fide researchers or other level of access can be given to data that's not protected. So there's a number of different ways of sort of putting this in place, but I think that infrastructure needs to be there needs to be a greater awareness of infrastructure that's in place, so that people aren't so hesitant that their data is just going to be handed to an insurer, or it's going to be used for purposes that are beyond what they'd actually be happy with it being used for. So I think there's a lot of education that needs to be in place, or dissemination at a public level, because I think there's a lack of understanding, and a lack of understanding about what some of the technologies we've now got in place that can bring this forward.
Thank you very much. I think education and understanding data is a fair point to make here. When we see how naive a lot of us are with our data when we use computers, when we use Facebook, when we use other social media, it's mind-blowing. And when we actually have a crisis and could do something with sharing data on via our cell phone, we get nervous and have useless, not very productive discussions and fears that pop up. So the education level is not where it should be. While in Asia, people have no problem, apparently, because they have learned from MERS and SARS, and they have systems in place that people do trust. About the systems, the trusted systems, I would like to bring in Anne Böhmer again, because you're at the innovation desk. What are you doing at BfArM, at European regulators, to, on top of what you described in the STARS project, what are you doing to better connect and to better enable that personalized medicines get not only approved by the regulator, but also reimbursed by the payers if they are really effective and they work?
So, well, in the Innovation Office, we, and this actually where, again, come back to our project, is that we, first of all, support the development of these innovations, because often these kind of developments, they start in the academic research setting, and therefore we really think that there is, first of all, a support for regulatory guidance and communication with the developers of personalized medicines approaches. So this is the first step we think is very important, and therefore we offer specific formats for getting into touch with developers and to think about regulatory questions which are important here. Of course, in a regulator's point of view, it will be a challenge, and a lot of questions will come up. But what we can do is that we offer our support in terms of to get to get a development on the way and to help to ask the right questions when it later comes to scientific advice and also maybe to approval. So this is what we can do from our side here in the Innovation Office.
Thank you very much, Annie. I would like to take Axel again by his missing hairs. What would you propose, or what is your immediate recommendation in order to have these patient preferences taken seriously and being considered by systems taking decisions?
What they should consider, or how they should do it?
And Serena, how could the data people help us here? Oh, Axel wanted to add something. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just asking. I would get them a flight to the FDA, and the FDA has several guidelines in place and a perfect systematic structure, not a perfect, a systematic structure within the organization and outside visible in the internet on how to incorporate patients as a valuable source. It's already been done. The methods are extracted, the guidelines are being written. Just a ticket flight over there and ask them how they do it.
Serena, would you agree, or do you have something to add?
Just to add to your previous comment, you know, I think we need to bridge across multiple sectors, and I think this is one of the big issues, even within sort of talking about data infrastructure. It can get to the level where it's mainly, you know, bioinformaticians or people who understand data that are handling or talking in a language, and we need to start to bridge between multiple different sectors, the researchers, the clinicians, the healthcare, but also then, you know, to the citizens and to different domains. So even this session here, we've got such a different diverse background of people, and the discussion can go in so many different ways, and it's difficult sometimes to understand the terminologies that people are using, and we need to start to break that down, I think, so that we can we don't end up with a divide between the different sectors.
I think that's an excellent point that you just made, and our time is up. Great to summarize the session like that. I hand over to Monica. Thank you all very much.
Thanks a lot also from me to all of you. Thanks a lot, David. Thanks a lot to all the three panelists, speakers. Really, I think somehow my message from the diverse discussions, because really the last point was very important, is we need a lot to think more about communication to create trust. This could be done by education, because I think we always have to think that everyone is thinking with his own head, and we have to find the good language for everyone. But in all this, we should not forget why we are doing all this personalized medicine research, implementation strategies. It's for the patient and for the citizens. So thanks a lot again for the discussions. I think that was a very great input for, well, especially if we were thinking towards implementation. Thanks a lot. And we are coming back here at 5:30 for the COVID session. Thank you.